I met my husband when I was 24. He was kind, ambitious, and everything I thought I wanted in a man. Our wedding was simple but beautiful, and for the first couple of years, everything felt right. We built a life together filled with dreams and quiet routines. But over time, something shifted. He started coming home late, talking less, smiling less. I understood. Work pressure, stress, but understanding didn't stop the emptiness that slowly crept in. I tried to talk to him, tried to remind him we still had each other, but he always said, just a few more months. Things will get better. Those few months turned into years. I started feeling like a background character in his life. He was physically present, but emotionally distant. Conversations turned into one-word answers. Dinners turned into silence, and celebrations turned into forgotten dates. That's when Ravi entered the picture again. He was my husband's closest friend from college, someone who used to drop by once in a while, but recently, he'd started visiting more often. My husband trusted him completely. He always said, if there's anyone I could leave everything to, it's Ravi. I never thought much of it until I did. Ravi was the opposite of what my husband had become. Where my husband was withdrawn, Ravi was attentive. Where my husband forgot my birthday, Ravi remembered. He noticed little things like when I changed my hairstyle or wore something new. It didn't seem like much in the beginning, just polite gestures. But those gestures began to mean something to me, more than they should have. We started talking, at first just casually over tea or while waiting for my husband to return. But his words carried warmth, presence. He asked me about my day and actually listened, and I responded. I laughed at his jokes. I asked him questions too. It was innocent, I told myself. Just conversation. One evening, I had a flat tire on the way back from the grocery store. I called my husband, but he didn't pick up. I didn't want to bother him again. Out of instinct, I called Ravi. He came immediately. He fixed the tire, bought me water, and made sure I got home safe. On the drive back, he didn't say anything unusual, but his silence was comforting. That night, I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. I began to wait for his visits. I paid more attention to how I looked when he was around. I hated myself for it, but I didn't stop. And I noticed he lingered more too. He looked at me differently, but never in a way I could call out. The air between us grew heavier each time he came by. Still, nothing had happened. Not yet. But something was shifting, quietly and undeniably. I was no longer just my husband's wife. I was a woman being seen again, heard again. And that feeling, it terrified me. Because deep down, I knew exactly where it could lead. I started waking up with a strange mix of guilt and anticipation. Every time the doorbell rang, a part of me hoped it was Ravi. I told myself it was just the attention I missed, that anyone would feel drawn to kindness when starved of it. But even I stopped believing my own excuses. The truth was simpler. I liked how he made me feel. Important. Noticed. Alive. One afternoon, my husband left for a 3-day business trip. Ravi came by to drop off a book he had borrowed. I invited him in, purely out of habit. We ended up talking for hours. About old movies, lost dreams, family, regrets. There was no flirting. Just something deeper, something that made me feel closer to him than I had felt to anyone in years. When he got up to leave, he hesitated. His eyes met mine, and for a second too long, we just stood there. Nothing was said. Nothing happened. But something had changed. The next morning, he texted me, I haven't felt that kind of peace in a long time. Thank you. I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, me neither. That single exchange opened a door we both should have kept closed. He started texting me every morning, asking how I slept. Every night, wishing me well. Small things, but dangerously consistent. My husband never noticed. Why would he? He trusted us both completely. I told myself it was just emotional support. Everyone needs a friend. But I had stopped sharing things with my husband. I had started sharing everything with Ravi instead. My doubts, my dreams, my frustrations. He always knew the right thing to say. He didn't try to fix me. He just listened. And slowly, he became the voice I looked forward to the most. It escalated quietly. One day, while helping me lift a heavy box, our hands touched and stayed there longer than they should have. Another day, I found myself reaching for my phone just to see if he had messaged. I began deleting our chats, not because there was anything inappropriate, but because I knew how it would look. Because I knew how it felt. My husband planned a weekend away to make up for lost time. But the effort felt hollow. We went through the motions, smiled for pictures, even laughed. But I felt distant, distracted. I kept thinking about how Ravi would have noticed the new place I cut my hair. How he would have asked about the book I was reading. How he would have known I was pretending. On our drive back, my husband talked about work deals and deadlines. I nodded, pretending to care. I realized then how easy it was to lie without words. How betrayal could begin not with touch, but with attention given to the wrong person. That night, I looked at my husband and wondered if he could feel the shift. If he saw how I avoided his eyes. But he just smiled, kissed my forehead, and fell asleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, knowing we were no longer alone in this marriage. I kept telling myself I hadn't done anything wrong. We hadn't crossed any physical boundaries. But my heart knew better. I was carrying secrets that didn't belong in a marriage. Every time Ravi messaged, I felt a mix of thrill and guilt. Every time I saw my husband, I felt like a liar. One evening, Ravi sent me a message that shook me. For words, I think I'm falling. I stared at it for minutes, trying to decide what to feel. Part of me wanted to shut it down immediately. Another part wanted to ask what he meant, but I already knew. He had fallen, and I had let him. I didn't respond that night, but I didn't block him either. Days passed. We kept seeing each other in moments that felt innocent but weren't. He would stop by with excuses, a charger he left, a recipe he wanted to share. Each time, we kept our distance. But the silence between us said everything. I avoided being alone with him, but when it happened, we both stood in that space, saying little, feeling everything. Then came the evening my husband planned a surprise dinner. He invited Ravi without telling me. The three of us sat at the table, and I couldn't breathe properly. Ravi acted normal, smiling, laughing, even complimenting my cooking. My husband looked proud, as if he had brought two people he loved together in the same room. I smiled, nodded, went through the motions. But inside, I felt like a traitor. After dinner, when my husband left to take a call, Ravi looked at me and said under his breath, "He never suspects a thing." That moment was like being punched in the stomach. Not because it was a secret, but because it was real. I had tried to tell myself this was just emotions, confusion, unmet needs. But that line broke whatever illusion I was clinging to. I stopped responding to Ravi after that. His messages piled up, apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to fix what we never should have started. I didn't answer any of them. I started spending more time with my husband, trying to recover something that had long been slipping. But even then, the silence between us was heavier than ever. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every part of me felt like it was being pulled in two directions, guilt and grief. I didn't miss Ravi. I missed the version of myself that hadn't let this happen. I hated what we had created. Something born out of loneliness, grown in secrecy, and poisoned by guilt. Then one night, while watching my husband read through emails at the dinner table, I realized something. He still believed I was the same woman he married. And that belief, more than anything, shattered me. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. And I didn't know if I could ever be her again. Ravi eventually stopped texting. Weeks passed without a single message. At first, the silence was deafening. Then it became a strange relief. I used that time to confront what I had become. Not just a wife who had drifted from her husband, but a person who let emotional neglect justify emotional betrayal. And now I had to live with it. I started observing my husband more, not as the man I once fell in love with, but as the man who was still trying in his own flawed way. He brought coffee to my bedside in the mornings again. He remembered small things I liked, how I hated onions in my food, how I preferred cold water at night. He even suggested we take time off and go somewhere together, just the two of us. Maybe he sensed something had changed. Maybe he was just trying to fix what he thought was ordinary distance. Either way, I let him try. We went away for 2 days. And for the first time in years, we talked, really talked, about the quiet way we'd both let life come between us. About his stress, my loneliness, our silence. He cried, which he never does. I cried too, not because of what we had lost, but because of what I had nearly destroyed trying to fill an empty space inside me. When we came back, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally accepted that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about facing the truth. I deleted Ravi's number, not out of anger, but because there was no place for that part of my life anymore. I didn't need to revisit it. The damage had already been done. But life has a cruel way of testing you just when you think you've found stability. A few weeks later, my husband came home unusually quiet. He placed his phone on the table, and I noticed his hands were shaking. He had found one of the deleted backups of our messages. He had read everything. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just asked one question. Why didn't you come to me? I had no answer that could make it better. I told him the truth, about how lonely I felt, how unnoticed I had become, how Ravi never touched me, but still got too close. I own my part, every bit of it. He listened, and then he left the house without a word. He returned hours later, looked at me with eyes I couldn't read, and said, I need time, but I don't want to walk away. Not yet. That was the moment I realized betrayal doesn't always end in screaming or broken plates. Sometimes, it ends with silence and the heavy weight of two people deciding whether love is enough. Since then, we've been trying slowly, quietly. Rebuilding trust is harder than I imagined. There are days he can't look at me, days I wonder if he should have left. But there are also days he reaches for my hand, and I know we're still holding on. And that's where this story ends, not with drama, not with revenge, but with the quiet work of trying to fix what almost broke completely.